The night was still, silent in that eerie way just before a storm. The suburban neighborhood of Shawnee, Kansas, lay wrapped in slumber, unaware that in the middle of their peaceful homes, a nightmare was unfolding. Then came the first sound, a shrill, panic scream, piercing through the silence like a knife. Smoke began to curl into the sky, thick and black, twisting like fingers reaching for the heavens. It snaked through the trees, past the streetlights, bleeding into the air with an acrid, suffocating presence. Then the siren, the low, distant wail at first, growing louder, sharper, more urgent. The call had come in just minutes earlier. 911, what's your emergency? For a second, there was nothing, just static, heavy breathing. Then a child's voice, small, broken, shaking with terror. My dad is trying to kill us. Where are you? What's happening? He stabbed Mom. He stabbed us. Please. It hurts. The line crackled with the sound of screams in the background, high-pitched, agonized, pure fear distilled into sound. Then more rustling, a scuffle, a muffled crash, a final breathless whisper before the line cut out. The house is on fire. By the time the first responders arrived, the air was already thick with smoke. Firefighters leapt from their trucks, moving fast, their boots pounding against the pavement. Flames licked at the curtains inside the house, their orange glow flickering against the windows like the eyes of something demonic. The front door was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind, an invitation into something monstrous. And then they saw her, a woman, barely alive, crawling across the front lawn, blood smeared across her arms, her legs, pooling beneath her on the damp grass. Her breath came in ragged, uneven gasps, her body trembling violently. She tried to lift herself onto her elbows, but collapsed, coughing, choking. She's alive. Get a medic now. 2 paramedics rushed forward, lifting her carefully as she weakly pointed toward the house. Her lips moved, forming words that wouldn't come. Then, with the last of her strength, she managed a single hoarse whisper. The kids inside. The first officer on the scene wasted no time. With one brutal kick, the door splintered open, the frame shuddering with the force of it. Inside, smoke coiled through the air, curling up the staircase like a ghostly specter. The living room was overturned. Couches slashed, a coffee table shattered, dark stains smeared across the walls. The flickering fire cast shifting shadows, warping reality into something unrecognizable. And then movement. A small figure huddled near the staircase. A child. The officer's flashlight cut through the smoke, landing on the boy's face. Wide, glassy eyes staring, unblinking, frozen in terror. His pajamas were soaked in crimson. It's okay, the officer said, voice steady despite the horror surrounding them. You're safe now. The boy didn't respond. He just lifted a trembling hand and pointed. The officer followed his gaze, and that's when he saw them. 5 children lay scattered across the floor, their small bodies motionless, barely breathing. Blood pooled beneath them, stark and glistening against the hardwood. Their chests rose and fell in shallow, uneven gasps, alive, but only just. A girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, shifted slightly, her lips parting as though to speak. But no words came, only a soft, wheezing sound, like air slipping through a cracked door. The officer dropped to his knees, frantically checking for pulses, calling for medics. Then came a sound, something faint, yet distinct. A drip, soft, rhythmic, the slow patter of something hitting the floor. The officer turned his head, and that's when he saw him, Matthew Lee Richards, a father-turned-monster. In the middle of it all, standing in the kitchen doorway, was Matthew Lee Richards. Still, silent, expressionless. His hands hung limp at his sides, his fingers slick and wet. His shirt, once light blue, was now dark, heavy with something thick and crimson. His face was blank, a void where emotion should be. He didn't run, didn't speak. And at his feet, gleaming under the dim glow of the flickering fire, lay the knife, the murder weapon. The officers raised their guns. Get on the ground. Matthew didn't move. He simply blinked, tilting his head slightly, as if confused, as if surprised by the presence of strangers in his home. His mouth opened, but no words came out, just a soft exhale. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then finally he moved, slowly, deliberately. He lowered himself to his knees, his hands falling into his lap, palms upturned, streaked with blood. No fight, no resistance. As the cuff snapped around his wrists, he finally spoke, just 2 words, barely above a whisper. "It's over." Outside, paramedics rushed to save what was left of his family. Inside, the house continued to burn. And in the middle of the destruction, where love was supposed to live, where faith was supposed to guide, stood a man who had chosen, in one unthinkable night, to betray everything he had ever preached. A father, a husband, a man of God, now just a monster. Who was Matthew Lee Richards? In the quiet, God-fearing community of Shawnee, Kansas, Matthew Lee Richards was a man many admired. He wasn't just a neighbor, a husband, or a father. He was a youth pastor, a man of faith, someone people turned to for guidance and wisdom. In the halls of his church, he was a beacon of kindness, preaching about love, family, and devotion to those around him. He seemed to embody everything a good Christian should be. He had it all, or at least that's what people believed. A beautiful wife, 5 precious children, a steady role in the church, helping troubled youth find purpose, a home filled with the echoes of laughter and prayer. But what no one realized, what no one even suspected, was that beneath the surface, behind the warm handshakes and Sunday sermons, Matthew Lee Richards was hiding a darkness so deep it would one day destroy everything. Ask anyone in the community, and they'd tell you the same thing. Matt was a good guy, a man of God. He loved his family. He led Bible studies. He mentored young minds. He spoke with passion about the importance of faith, the sanctity of marriage, the responsibility of raising children with strong morals. Sunday mornings, you'd see him at the pulpit, a picture of devotion, his wife by his side, his children sitting obediently in the front pew. He'd quote scripture with conviction, his voice steady, his smile warm. On social media, it was the same story. Happy family photos, a loving father, playing with his kids in the backyard, date nights with his wife, posting captions about how blessed he was, snippets of Sunday school lessons, encouraging others to keep their faith. To the outside world, Matthew Lee Richards was the embodiment of the perfect Christian man. But behind closed doors, that illusion was crumbling. Behind the perfectly curated life, something was wrong. Those closest to him might have noticed small cracks in the facade. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The way his laugh seemed hollow, forced. The way his wife's once vibrant energy seemed to dim over the years. People dismissed it. Every family has struggles, right? But Matthew wasn't just struggling. He was drowning. Some nights, the weight of it all settled in his chest like a stone. Financial troubles. The suffocating expectations of being a pastor. Personal demons he refused to speak of. He had spent years convincing the world that he was the man they all believed him to be. But in the darkness of his home, where no one could see, where the mask could slip, Matthew Lee Richards was something else entirely. And as the pressure built, as the illusion of his perfect life collapsed under its own weight, a terrible thought took root in his mind. A way out, a way to make it all stop. He told himself it was mercy. He told himself it was love. He told himself that no one could understand the burden he carried. And so one fateful night, he made a choice. One that would turn the beloved pastor into a monster. One that would leave his name forever stained in blood. The hidden struggles, a life built on lies. To the world, Matthew Lee Richards was a man of unwavering faith, a devoted husband, a father who adored his children. But behind the closed doors of his Kansas home, reality was unraveling. There were no Sunday morning smiles here. No joyful laughter at children playing. No harmony. No peace. Only the quiet, suffocating weight of a life crumbling under its own deception. Because what the church didn't know, what his congregation didn't see, was that Matthew was drowning in debt. It had started small, a few missed payments, a late bill here and there, but small things snowball. The debt grew, like an infection creeping through every part of his life. The credit card statements piled up, each one heavier than the last. The mortgage payments fell behind. The refrigerator was emptier every week. Then came the eviction notice, taped to the front door like a cruel joke, a silent announcement that the life he had built was on borrowed time. He tore it down before his wife could see. But she wasn't blind. She saw the way his shoulders slumped, the way he paced at night, rubbing his temples, whispering to himself. She asked him what was wrong. He smiled, kissed her forehead, and lied. The church didn't know. The community didn't know. Even his own wife and children didn't know. Because Matthew Lee Richards was a man who wore masks. And this was the biggest one of all. The weight of it pressed on him, like a vice. Each sleepless night, he felt it tightening. Each bill, each call from the bank, each quiet moment spent staring at his children's faces, knowing he was failing them. It chipped away at him. And then a thought, a whisper in the back of his mind, slithering in like poison. What if they never find out? What if there's no more debt? No more bills, no more stress, no more shame? What if he erased it all? The idea started as something fleeting, something absurd. But it didn't leave. It stayed. It grew. At first, he pushed it away. But the night stretched longer. The thoughts became louder. And soon, Matthew wasn't just pacing the house in distress. He was planning for a way out, planning for a way to make it all stop. In the end, it wasn't rage. It wasn't an impulsive act of violence. It was something much more chilling, a decision, a cold, calculated plan. And when the night came, when his wife and children lay sleeping, he made his choice. The house was silent. The knife was waiting. And soon, the world would see Matthew Lee Richards for what he truly was. September 16th, 2023. The crime unfolds. The night was like any other. A quiet Saturday in Shawnee, Kansas. The kind of night where the air was still, where the world outside slept peacefully under cloak of darkness. Inside the modest family home, the Richards household was at rest. His wife lay beside him, breathing softly in the darkness. His 5 children nestled in their beds, lost in dreams. It should have been a night of safety, of warmth. But Matthew Lee Richards had already made his decision. Tonight, everything would end. He rose from bed without a sound. His movements were deliberate, practiced. A quiet exhale, a steadying of his hands. A final moment to collect himself before stepping into the darkness. In his grip, cold and unwavering, was the knife. The first cut into the fragile illusion of his perfect life. The first betrayal, a child's innocence shattered. The hallway was dark, but Matthew knew every step. He had walked these halls 1,000 times, tucked his children in, whispered goodnight, prayed over them. And now, he moved with the same certainty. But this time, there was no prayer, only the silent, terrible purpose of a man who had let darkness consume him. He reached the first bedroom. His son lay curled beneath the blankets, peaceful, unaware of the horror lurking at his bedside. Matthew raised a knife. And then, a stir. The boy's eyes fluttered open, sleepy, unfocused, a child barely awake. And then, in a soft, confused voice, "Dad, why do you have a knife?" A moment, a breath, then the first stab. The boy gasped, his small body arching in shock. The second stab, then another. A choked cry escaped his lips, barely more than a whisper, lost in the vast, smothering silence of the house. The violence erupts, a nightmare in the darkness. The first attack set off a chain reaction. Another child stirred, a sleepy mumble. "What's going on?" Matthew turned, his movements eerily methodical. The knife found its mark again. And then the screaming began. One by one, the children awoke. Cries of terror. The sharp, panic shuffle of small feet trying to escape. The sickening sound of blade meeting flesh. Some fought, some begged, but none of them could stop him. The moment of defiance. His wife wakes up. The commotion was too much. In the master bedroom, his wife jolted awake. Her breath hitched. Something was wrong. And then she saw him, standing in the doorway, the knife gleaming in the dim light. his hands already slick with blood. The realization hit her all at once. This wasn't a home invasion. This wasn't a nightmare. This was her husband, the father of her children, the man who had kissed her goodnight, the man who had promised to love and protect them. And now, he was a monster in the dark. Adrenaline surged. She leapt from the bed, lunging at him with everything she had. Fingernails dug into his flesh. A struggle, a desperate fight. But Matthew was prepared. He had been ready for this. The knife lashed out. A deep slash across her arm. Another across her ribs. She staggered, hands pressing against the gaping wound. Blood seeped through her fingers. But she wouldn't stop fighting. Not while her children were still screaming. Not while she still had breath in her lungs. She had to stop him. She had to save them. The fire begins. Smoke and desperation. Somewhere in the chaos, something else ignited. A flickering glow. A growing heat. Fire. Smoke coiled to the hallways. Seeping under doors. Curling into the lungs of the already wounded. A child, barely conscious, crawled toward the hallway. Blood smeared behind them. Their tiny fingers digging into the carpet, desperate to escape. A brother, a sister. Someone called out for their mother, but there was no response. The fire spread, consuming the home, thickening the air with smoke and ash. Every breath burned. Every movement felt sluggish. And in the center of it all, standing still amidst the destruction, was Matthew Lee Richards. The final moments before police arrived. The neighbors had heard the screams. The 911 call had already been made. Sirens screamed through the night, red and blue lights slicing through the smoke. Police and firefighters rushed toward the burning home. They kicked down the door, burst inside, and what they found was pure horror. The house in flames. Blood streaked across the walls. Children, bleeding, gasping, barely alive. And in the middle of it all, Matthew stood, still, unmoving, expressionless. The knife lay at his feet. There was no struggle, no attempt to run. He simply watched as the world crumbled around him. No emotion, no regret, just silence. And in that moment, Matthew Lee Richards wasn't pastor. He wasn't a father. He wasn't a man of God. He was a monster. And there was no coming back from what he had done. The arrest and interrogation and his chilling confession. The house was in flames, smoke curling into the night sky, like the final breath of a dying beast. The flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers and fire trucks painted the scene in harsh, shifting colors. Firefighters rushed in, their boots pounding against the pavement as they carried the injured children to safety. Medics scrambled to stabilize the victims, tiny, bloody bodies barely clinging to life. And in the middle of it all, Matthew Lee Richards stood still. There was no attempt to run, no panic, just eerie stillness. A figure surrounded by chaos, yet untouched by it. When the police stormed in, guns drawn, voices sharp and commanding, he didn't even flinch. Get on the ground. He lowered himself slowly, deliberately. No resistance, no fight, as if this moment had already played out in his mind, and he had accepted his fate long before the first scream pierced the night. A pair of rough hands grabbed him, shoved him down. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Click, click, his fate sealed in metal and finality. One of the officers, eyes burning with fury, yanked him up to his feet. "What the hell did you do?" the officer growled. Matthew said nothing, not a word. No pleas, no cries for mercy, no desperate justifications, just silence. As they led him past the burning home, past the wreckage of the life he had destroyed, past the medics working frantically to save his wife and children, he never once looked back, not even when his wife, barely conscious on a stretcher, managed to croak out a single shattered whisper. "Why?" The interrogation room was cold, sterile, empty, the kind of place where truth had nowhere to hide. Matthew sat in the metal chair, his hands still cuffed to the table. His shirt was soaked in blood, some of it his own, most of it not. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face. Across from him, two detectives, hardened men who had seen the worst of humanity, But even they struggled to comprehend this. One of them, Detective Harris, leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "Let's start with the basics, Matthew," he said, pressing the recorder's red button. "Tell us why you did it." Matthew exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. And then, for the first time since his arrest, he spoke. A whisper, a confession. I couldn't let them find out. Harris exchanged a sharp glance with his partner. "Find out what?" Matthew closed his eyes, as if replaying the nightmare in his mind. That we were going to lose everything. His voice was eerily calm, detached. I tried to keep up. I really did. But the bills kept piling up. The church wasn't paying enough. The bank, the eviction notice. It was all crashing down. He opened his eyes again, his gaze empty, hollow. They were going to find out we had nothing left. That we were going to be homeless. I couldn't let them live with that pain. A long silence stretched between them. Harris's partner, Detective Cole, let out a sharp breath, his hands tightening into fists. "You mean to tell me you thought this was better? That this—" He gestured toward the evidence photos, the blood-stained images of Matthew's own children, was mercy. Matthew didn't blink. "I didn't want them to suffer," he murmured. Cole slammed his fist onto the table. "You stab your own kids," he roared. "You set your house on fire. You call that saving them?" Matthew tilted his head slightly, his brow furrowing, as if struggling to understand why they didn't see his logic. "It was quick," he whispered. "They wouldn't have to feel what I felt. The fear, the shame, the failure." Harris's jaw clenched. "Your wife fought back," he pointed out. "She didn't want to die. Neither did your kids. They ran. They screamed. They tried to get away from you." Matthew blinked at him, expression unreadable. "They didn't understand," he said simply. Cole let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head in disgust. "You're damn right they didn't understand. Because what kind of father does this?" The cold reality of his confession. Hours passed. Detectives pressed him, demanded explanations, tried to force a shred of genuine remorse out of him. But Matthew never wept, never begged for forgiveness, never broke. He never denied a thing. He walked them through the night step by step. How he had planned it, how he had waited for the right moment, how he believed, truly believed, that he was saving them from something worse. And when asked why he stood there after the fire started, why he didn't try to escape, his response was chillingly simple. "Where else did I have to go?" The aftermath. No redemption, no excuses. In the end, his confession was airtight. There was no need for deception, for loopholes, for bargaining. The blood was on his hands, literally. His children survived, but barely. His wife lived, but would carry the scars of his betrayal forever. And Matthew? He was never going home again. No church to welcome him back. No family to love him. Only a cell, and the knowledge that he had destroyed everything he had once sworn to protect. As the detectives left the room, Harris turned back one last time, staring at the man who had once been a youth pastor, a father, a husband. "You didn't save them," he said coldly. "You just made sure they'd never trust love again." And with that, he shut the door, leaving Matthew Lee Richards alone, with nothing but his chilling confession and the darkness he had created. The courtroom and sentencing, the courthouse was silent as the trial of Matthew Lee Richards began. It was a somber atmosphere, no cheers, no outbursts, just the weight of what had occurred hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating. Inside, the family's devastation was palpable as they faced a man who had once been their protector, their pillar of strength, but who now stood in front of them as a shadow of everything they thought they knew. His wife, Lindsay Richards, took the stand first. She sat with her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes red from both exhaustion and the sheer emotional toll of the events that had unfolded. She had been through more in the past few months than anyone could fathom, losing everything, nearly losing her life, and then facing the person she had once trusted most in the world. "Matthew," she said softly, her voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and anger, "you were supposed to protect us. I loved you. I trusted you with my life and with the lives of our children." She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but she held them back, unwilling to break down in front of the courtroom. "You were our everything, but that night You became our worst nightmare. Her words echoed in the courtroom, a painful reminder of what had been lost. The jury listened intently, their expressions hardening as they absorbed the weight of her testimony. The children were next to testify, though it was clear that this process was as traumatic for them as it was for their mother. Each of them had suffered. Each had a story to tell. Some were too young to fully understand what had happened, but they still bore the scars, emotional and physical, of their father's violence. One of the older children, barely a teenager, spoke through tears, describing how they had woken up to the sounds of their father's footsteps, the cold, metallic glint of the knife in his hand. "I didn't know what was happening," the child said, voice breaking. "I thought maybe it was a nightmare. But when he came at me, when I saw him hurting us..." They shook their head, unable to continue without breaking down. Matthew never looked up at them. He sat with his hands folded in front of him, his face stony, unfeeling. The emotional toll of the trial seemed to have little impact on him. It was as though he was still stuck in a world of his own making, a world where nothing mattered except the shame he felt for what had happened to his life. The defense tried to paint a picture of a man who had snapped under pressure, but the prosecution, fueled by the undeniable truth of Matthew's actions, quickly dismantled any argument that tried to humanize him. Matthew Lee Richards wasn't a victim. He was a perpetrator, a father who betrayed his own blood, a husband who betrayed his wife, a man who had let desperation push him to an unspeakable act of violence. When the time came for the sentencing, the entire courtroom fell silent. There was no hope in the air, no sense that any word spoken would make a difference. The damage had been done. Judge Marlene Adams stood tall, her voice steady as she looked down at Matthew Lee Richards. The weight of what she was about to say was clear to everyone. She had seen many cases, but this one was different. This one wasn't about a man who had lost his way. It was about a man who had made a choice. You have committed an act so unspeakable, so incomprehensible, that there are no words that can make sense of it, Judge Adams began, her voice clear and unwavering. A father, a husband, a youth pastor, a man who was supposed to protect, to guide, to love. Instead, you took everything that mattered to you and destroyed it. You not only tried to kill your own family, but you shattered the very foundation of their trust. You turned love into fear, hope into despair, and faith into betrayal. Her eyes hardened as she glanced at the defendant, whose face remained as cold as it had been throughout the trial. For the attempted murder of your family, you are sentenced to 29 years in prison. You will serve every single one of those years with the knowledge that you took the lives of those who trusted you more than anyone in the world. The room was thick with emotion as the sentence was read aloud. Lindsay let out a soft, pained sob from the back of the room, and the children, some of whom had managed to hold it together throughout the trial, finally let their emotions go. They had been through so much, and now there was a finality to it all. Their father was gone, but the scars would remain. Before the judge could end the proceedings, Lindsay was allowed to give a victim's impact statement. She stood, her body trembling but her voice firm. "Matthew, I don't know what you thought you were doing," she said, her words heavy with grief. "I don't know what pain, what fear, what desperation led you to believe that murdering us was the only way out. But I know one thing for sure. You betrayed us. You betrayed our love. You betrayed everything we stood for. And I can never forgive you for that." She took a deep breath, looking at the jury, at the judge, and then back at her husband. Her estranged husband, now a stranger in every way. "You were supposed to protect us, but instead, you became the monster in our lives. And now, I have to try to pick up the pieces, try to rebuild, to somehow explain to our children why the man who should have loved them most was the one who almost took everything away from them." There was a long pause. Lindsay's words left an indelible mark on the courtroom. This was not the cold, calculated confession of a man seeking redemption. This was a woman who had been robbed of everything she held dear, standing tall in the face of the unimaginable. As the trial drew to a close and the sentencing was delivered, the haunting reality of what had occurred began to settle in. Matthew Lee Richards had been a man of faith, a beloved youth pastor who had preached love and redemption. He had been a husband, a father, a figure of trust and stability in his community. But behind the facade, there was a darkness festering, a deep, insurmountable desperation that had driven him to make the ultimate betrayal. It is a tragic reminder that sometimes even the most seemingly perfect lives can be built on fragile foundations. The pressure of financial ruin, the fear of failure, and the weight of maintaining appearances can eat away at a person's soul until there is nothing left but the desperate belief that escape, through any means necessary, is the only solution. Matthew's story is a chilling reminder that financial struggles, emotional isolation, and a sense of hopelessness can drive people to extreme actions. It's a tragedy that might have been avoided if he had sought help, if he had faced his problems with the support of those who cared about him, if he had acknowledged his inner turmoil instead of burying it beneath a mask of control. There is no easy answer. There is no simple resolution. But the haunting final thought that lingers after the story is that Matthew Lee Richards was a man of faith, a devoted father, a trusted leader. But when his world collapsed, he made the ultimate betrayal. He chose violence over vulnerability, destruction over reconciliation, and in doing so, he lost everything. The story of Matthew Lee Richards serves as a chilling reminder of how desperation can drive a person to do the unthinkable. A man who was once a beacon of faith, love, and trust turned into the very thing he had vowed to protect others from. This tragedy, born from financial pressures and personal struggles, is a heartbreaking example of what can happen when one loses sight of hope. Let it be a lesson to all of us to seek help when life feels like it's crumbling and to remember that there is always another way forward. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps us continue to bring important stories to light. Comment below with your thoughts on how desperation can shape lives, and let's continue this conversation. And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling, reaching out for help is the first step to finding a way out. Stay strong and stay aware.